purpose for effect, but I think a lot of people, I've seen people who just have a very difficult time in relationships and interacting with people, because every time they do, they tend to tick people off or rub them the wrong way. And I don't think it's on purpose. I think it's because they can't read the cue of how it's going with that person in interaction. So I think if you don't have that ability, I think that part of the brain isn't working like it should, and maybe, you know, I'm not saying these folks are all autistic. These are just folks that have a difficult time with this reading social cues. And I think emotional intelligence might be difficult for them in a way. Maybe not impossible. They could, if they learned about it, they could probably do a better job. But you know, it's definitely, it's kind of an interesting thing to think about. Okay. You know, they call parents that they call these guys, these authors, call parents that do this emotion, that teach their kids emotional intelligence. They call them emotion coaches. That's kind of a little bit hokey, I think. You know, I don't know if I want to call it that or not, but they've done some. They've looked at this. They've looked at how parents that do this effectively, how do they do it? And first of all, they don't necessarily. These parents, they don't object to the kids' displays of emotion or ignore them, but instead they accept the negative emotion as kind of a fact of life. You know, emotion's going to happen, you're going to have emotions and this kind of thing. And then they use this emotional outburst from this child as a way of teaching the child about emotions and how to deal with them. They usually do this in 5 different steps. One is they become aware of the child's emotion, so that's the first thing. And then they recognize the emotion as instead of getting all caught up in it and reacting to it in some way, they look at it and say, you know, I could use this to teach this kid something, you know? So they sort of detach a little bit and they think about how they can teach the child using this emotion. They listen empathically and they validate the child's feelings instead of ignoring it or saying, you know, quit your crying, suck it up, you know, quit being a crybaby, that kind of thing. Fourth, they help the child find words to label their emotions so that the child can say, I'm sad, or I'm angry, or whatever, and, you know, and sort of normalize it a little bit. Okay, yeah, that's okay to be angry and sad. All of us get that way. And then the fifth thing is they set limits while helping the child solve the problem at hand. Setting limits, I mean, you know, making sure that they're not going to get hurt in some way from throwing a tantrum or something like that. Now they've done some research. These guys have done some research, you know, trying to find out what difference does it make in a child's life to be emotionally coached. And what they found is the kids that have the parents that do this emotion coaching, and again, I don't know if parents would call it that, but just they're sort of modeling emotional intelligence for them. These kids tend to be physically healthier, score higher academically, they get along better with friends and have fewer behavior problems, and are less likely to act violently than kids of parents who don't do this emotion coaching. They also tend to have fewer negative feelings and more positive ones, and overall are more healthy emotionally. They're more resilient in the face of stress. They can soothe themselves better. I think that's kind of an important thing. I mean, they get stressed out, something's not going right in their life. They can sort of soothe themselves through that a little better, whereas I think kids, a lot of us have a harder time doing that. They bounce back from distress better. And also, you know, this emotional intelligence and the emotion coaching has been shown to help protect kids from the harmful effects of marital conflict and divorce, such as like school failure, rejection by their kids, depression, and antisocial behaviors. So, you know, that's a pretty tough time for a kid when their parents are not getting along or are going to go through a divorce. And, you know, I think for a child to be able to modulate their feelings and kind of accept their feelings and deal with them in some way, that's much more healthy than a child who doesn't know how to deal with it or doesn't think it's appropriate to deal with it and never does. Or, you know, or does 15 years later when they blow up and get angry at whichever parent left or whatever. Interesting, one other piece of information is they've done they looked at to see, you know, who does the emotion coaching and you know, what effect does it have on the kids. Believe it or not, it turns out to be the fathers that seem to have the most effect when they did this. I'm not sure why that is. It stumps me a little bit. You tend to think of moms being more emotional and maybe the kids responding to that better, but what they found was that the fathers had a bigger influence on the kids. So if the father was more, emotionally distant, or harsh, or critical, or dismissing of the child's emotions, that has a pretty deep negative impact on the child, even more so than when a mother does that. These kids that have fathers that do these things, they tend to do more poorly in school, they fight more, their overall health is worse. And I think this is kind of alarming because it turns out about 28% or more of American kids are growing up in homes without fathers, without positive male figures in their lives. And even if there is a male figure, how many of them are actually doing emotion coaching? I would think very few, probably. Men, I mean, for some reason, not to pick on me, I am one after all. I can't really diss the men too bad since I am one. But I think men in general don't tend to, well, I just think we're not as emotional to start with. I think things don't affect us as much or as harshly, I suppose, emotionally as it does for women, which I think is a genetic or an inborn thing. But it's not to say we don't have emotions, because let me tell you, I'm a man, I know I have emotions, okay? So all of us do, all of us men do. I think a lot of us, though, I think it's society that tells us that we shouldn't. That emotions are, well, mainly it's like sadness and things like that. Those are forms of weakness, is what society tells us. So I think even though there's families that have fathers in them, I think a lot of them are not really doing a very good job of this emotion coaching. This emotion coaching thing we're talking about, it's like anything else. It takes work. I mean, it isn't easy, So nothing good comes from anything easy. That's what I always say, You can't do anything quick and easy and have it be very beneficial for you. But if you put the work in it, and the analogy these guys used in their book, and this other John Gottman, and this Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, the analogy he uses is like if you're teaching your child, for fathers, if you're teaching your child or coaching your child to play baseball, you don't avoid the game, right? How's it going to get any good if you avoid the games? It's not, you don't avoid the game, but you put on your glove and your ball, and get your ball and your bat, and you go out and you play, right? You practice over and over again. And it's no different with this emotion coaching. You coach just like you would for a sport, except this time we're dealing with emotions. And shoot, just talking about the emotions is better than doing nothing, I think. And so I think that's pretty much all I wanted to say today. I did put up the books. I had those up for a few minutes, and then there are these websites. These websites there are various different websites. This one is Emotional Intelligence, is the EI, and then it's consortium.org. New Horizons and Teleris.org. Those are both child and brain development websites. So they'll tell you about some of the new science. Some of the stuff came from these websites that I talked about tonight. And then, of course, I got to put a plug in for the old it'sabrainthing.com, or It's a Brain Thing. It's on YouTube. So this video will actually be on there maybe tomorrow or the next day. And that's pretty much all I want to say tonight. Does anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? Went through this with you before, probably about a year ago, so you probably don't have any new questions on anything. You see this, though, in everyday life, I would imagine.
Most definitely.
Most definitely, yeah. Yeah.
Just about 40 years late.
I'm just about 40 years late? You're just about 40 years late?
40 years late hearing all this.
Yeah. You know what, though? The comment was he's about 40 years late of learning this stuff, and I apologize. I'm 38 years old, so I couldn't have helped you 40 years ago. But I will say that that's exactly why I'm doing this. I mean, this stuff is not brand new. I mean, it's been out for a while, but the general public, I don't think, knows about this stuff. Why? I don't know why. Because nobody got up and said anything about it, I suppose. And so I figured, I got the knowledge. Somebody needs to get it out there. We might as well try. And actually, the internet, it's just been fascinating. I've had folks from, I don't know if you heard me mention last time, but I've had folks from China and Australia and the UK, all over the world that are hitting this thing. Not huge numbers, but enough that, that folks are sending messages saying, hey, thanks for doing this. It really hit home to me. And, if I